Hi. JavaScript is oftentimes used on client computers to verify user data before it's submitted to a server, and we're going to do a project that simulates that. So I have a program that is partially developed, and I'm going to demonstrate how it works, and then I'm going to explain what you need to do to modify it, complete it, and improve it. Okay, so let me start out by showing you the program from the user's perspective. Okay, so this is not a very pleasing interface, and part of what you'll have to do is redesign this to make it a little bit more user-friendly and aesthetically pleasing. But in any event, I'm going to enter in data. Okay, so if this form were being filled out correctly and the user played by the rules, they would enter in CHARLES maybe, and put in a last name, and put in a phone number with an area code 765. Now I'm going to mess this up a little bit. 6202094. Okay, so I'm a human. I tend to make mistakes. Okay, so I left a hyphen out between the area code and the prefix of my telephone number. So I'm going to leave it that way, and I've designed the program so it'll correct that. And then I'm going to put in my date of birth. Okay, now I happen to know what format I expect the input to be entered in, both the phone number and the date of birth, and I'll have more to say about that. You're going to have to do something to make, again, this a little bit more user-friendly and convenient for the user to enter the data. But this would be my expectation, that the user would provide data like this and then attempt to submit it. And I'm going to have several alert statements fire off, and we'll look at them. I'll call your attention to them as we analyze the program code. I put those alert statements in at very specific locations so you can trace the execution of the program. But in the end, those alert statements are going to come out, and the submit button will do one of two things. If the data validates properly, then it'll fire off one alert that says submission occurred, and if there's any kind of error, then it's going to write ERR in whatever text box there is an error, and it'll overwrite the user's input, and then the program will not fire off that message saying data submitted. Okay, so again, I'll explain that again, but I've set it up front here just in case I forget. All right, so in my case, when I submit, again, remember this phone number is not entered in the exact format that I would like for it to be. I'm going to go ahead and submit. I get a JavaScript alert telling me that I've made it to verify data, which is a JavaScript function that I've written. Okay, so I put that at the very beginning just to be able to trace the execution of the program code. And then I see another alert that shows 2015. Now that's actually a value that's being returned from a JavaScript function. So I'll talk about that JavaScript function here in a moment. There's a date class, and it has a particular method that we'll employ in order to get the year part, and I'll explain how that's going to work later on. But just be aware that I can query the system for the date components, day, month, year, and then time components clear down to milliseconds, I think. So I'm going to say okay to that. Again, these alerts are going to come out eventually, but they're useful as we try to write the program and follow the execution of the code, make sure that everything's executing according to plan. And then I see another alert that shows me the value that's entered into this text box, exactly how it's entered into that text box. So you'll notice that just as in the text box, I'm missing that first hyphen. And then you see all the numeric values that appear without any hyphens. Again, when we get to that part of the program code, I'll point this out, what's happening there, but I'm just giving you the initial overview of the way the program works. And finally, it comes back with that number properly formatted, and then it would be possible to write that value. Since I have properly formatted it now, I could, instead of displaying it through an alert, I could display it right back into this text box. So if the user had messed up, then if it was a minor omission like the omission of a hyphen, or maybe they put in a slash instead of a hyphen or something like that, then the program will deal with it by parsing out all the non-numeric characters, and if the numeric characters are in place, it will go back through and insert hyphens in the appropriate location in order to then push it back out to the form for display purposes. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. I'm having it check this string and rebuild it basically to ensure that hyphens are placed where hyphens are supposed to be. And if the user doesn't put in the correct number of digits, so there are, I want to say 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 numeric digits. If in that string there are not 10 numeric digits, then it's going to report back with an error. But we'll see the details of that here in a moment. All right, so the details of that. I'm going to hold off on the details for just a second, and I'm going to go over to the lecture outline. So this is a program that's going to require that you make modifications in order to verify or validate, really, user input. And along the way, I'm going to be pointing out the JavaScript char@ method. What does it do and how does it work? You'll see that demonstrated. There's also a property in JavaScript called isNan, which stands for is not a number. Okay, and we'll be able to use that property to check and see whether individual values like the 7 and the 6 and the 5 and so forth are numeric characters, digits in the range of 0 through 9. There is also a very convenient length property, and so as I have a need to traverse this string, I can go from the first character to the second character to the third character, clear out to the last character without necessarily knowing the actual number of characters. There's a property called length, and it translates into an integer value that is equivalent to the number of characters in the string, beginning with a counting value of 1. We'll be using I'll be demonstrating the JavaScript date class, how to create an instance of the date class, otherwise known as an object, how to create an instance of the date class for the purpose of yanking date components from the value that's returned from the system clock. And specifically, I'll be demonstrating how to get the year component. And we'll see how that's used and why it would be used. And then one of the things I do in this program is I have more than one JavaScript function, and I call up one function from the submit button, and then that function will in turn call other JavaScript functions. Okay. Now, as soon as this video is recorded, I'll go ahead and put the video link here. But let me move on down here to the example of the form. So I did a screenshot of the program that I just demonstrated. I cropped the relevant portion of the form, and I inserted text boxes here with numbers that correspond with instructions on the next page for what you're supposed to do at those various places on the form. So when you look at, I have a item 0, okay, and let me explain that first. So item 0 says format the form using external CSS. The example that I've done, I applied some CSS through Expression Web, and consequently it generated internal CSS. Okay, I don't want you to use internal CSS in your program. I want you to use external CSS. That's been covered previously. You should know how to do that. So you're going to be formatting this, making it look much nicer than what I did. I'm going to, allow you to use a little creativity and so forth in the process. And I want you to make it aesthetically pleasing and as convenient as possible. Okay, so another thing that I'm going to have you do, item 1, is to insert a picture in the upper right part of the form, and you can use any picture you want to. I don't care what the picture is. It could be a picture of yourself. It could be a picture of, whatever is appropriate. And you are to control where that picture is placed on the form using CSS. And again, that was demonstrated previously, so you should be able to go back to it and work with it and figure it out. Item 2, write a JavaScript function to force the user to enter the date in a month, day, year format. Okay, so when I entered in my birthday, do I still have that? Yeah. I put it in a MM August, DD 21, YYYY format 2015. Okay, so that's the way we want it formatted. And furthermore, those components, like the 2 digits that make up the day, need to be restricted to the range 01 through 31. Okay, so if they're any larger than that or any smaller than that, we got a problem, because 30 days has September, April, June, and November, and all the rest have 31 except for February, right? And month needs to be in the range of 01 through 12, and YY is returned from the system clock using an instance of the JavaScript date class. And then I have a hyperlink here where you can go to the W3 Schools tutorial and read more about the date class and the various methods that can be used. We're only going to use one of the methods, the one that returns the year in a again in a YYYY format. So the user will be expected to put in this. Okay, now you're going to be interrogating that string of characters, checking to make sure that there are 2 numeric digits and that those numeric digits are in the range of 01 through 12, for instance, as we look at these 2 digits, right? We already discussed that. Now the fact is, the user could put in anything they want to here. They could make a mistake. They could put in R2D2, because what will happen is your program is going to be designed to validate their day and month components, but then just go ahead and query the system get the 4-digit year and then replace whatever they put in with the 4-digit year. So you're going to be guaranteed that the current year is going to be inserted as the last 4 characters. Hopefully that makes sense. Number 3, you're to put in some kind of prompt in here. Now what I've done is I've laid this out in a table that has 3 rows and 4 columns. You can change the size of that table, and you could have a row beneath where it says phone and above where the submit button is, and in that row you could just go ahead and provide the table data TD value to show the proper input mask. Okay, so that particular format scheme is known as a mask. Okay, and so you can just put a prompt in there that would simply read, MMDDYYYY over here where it says number 3. And, you could put that in there, and then that would be a visual cue to the user as to how they're supposed to enter the data. Much like the way first name and date of birth, last name, and phone are just table data that provide a prompt for the corresponding text boxes. So there should be a format mask provided for entering in the date. There should also be a format mask for telling the user how to enter in the phone number. So again, whenever I put that in, I was familiar with how it should be done, but a user can't be expected to automatically know, that they're supposed to add the area code or anything like that. And then finally, I want you to add a button that'll clear out the form and reset a global variable called good data, and we'll see that when we look at the program code. But there needs to be then a button that's set up to wipe out all the contents of the text box, set those equal to an empty string. Okay, just assign the string literal double quote to the text box, and that will blank it out, set it equal to an empty string. And in a previous program, I'd also shown you how to set focus. I believe I did that. So it would be real convenient if you would then set focus on this text box, but that's not absolutely necessary. Now what you're going to end up doing is you're going to have to write a method that will deal with all the details of validating the date, and you're going to have to write another separate method that's going to deal with the details of clearing out the form. And the method that you write that deals with clearing out the form will be invoked from a button, and the method that you write that is going to attend to the date details is going to get called up from another JavaScript function that I've already written. And you'll see how that's done, because in that method I call another method. I've written 2 methods. I call the first method from the submit button, and then when that method's in progress at a certain point, it calls another method. What you'll do is you'll have to put a second call in there in order to call your method that does all the details concerning date. Okay, so that's kind of the assignment there. Now let's see how the program actually looks. You've seen it run. You know what I'm expecting, certain modifications. Now let's take a look at this program code. And I'm going to try to keep a couple bouncing back and forth between 2 windows. Okay, so here's the actual program, and if I do this right, I can show both of these simultaneously. Okay, so here we have the code in an HTML file called verifyform.html. You're looking at the source code, and you're looking at the way that program is rendered from this HTML. Okay, so what do we have? We have the usual stuff at the beginning with the doc type tag and the opening HTML and the head section. And you'll notice I did not put in an appropriate title. You should put an appropriate title in there so it says something other than untitled in the title bar. Then I have a script section, okay, and in that script section, which begins right here, I have a global variable being declared. Notice that's different than what you've seen before because this variable is being declared outside of a function. That's a global variable as opposed to this variable which is being declared inside of a function. Okay, so the variable that's being declared inside of the function is a local variable. Global variables store values that can be used by any and all functions within the script. So I have a function called verify data. I have another function called test phone. Both of these methods, these functions, can use good data. On the other hand, my date is a variable that's being declared locally, and the only place it can be used is inside of the function in which it's declared. It's a local variable, has a more limited scope. And I believe we talked about scope before. General rule is you want to keep the scope of variables as narrow as possible, but in some instances where we need to share data between functions, global variables can be useful, and here's an example of where that occurs. Okay, so I have this function called verify data, and I have another function called test phone, and you'll notice that verify data has multiple parameters. Okay, so when it gets called up, 4 arguments are passed to it. Okay, 4 chunks of data are plugged into it whenever that function gets called up. And the function then goes along its merry way doing what it needs to do until it reaches this point right here. And rather than providing additional code within the verify data function to verify that I have the correct number of numeric characters in the phone number, in order to reinsert the hyphens in the proper location, or to notify the user that the input is unacceptable and needs to be re-entered. Instead of doing all that in the current method verify data, I instead put all that program code specific to what's going on in the phone text box here in a second method called test phone. So I decompose the problem. Again, it's like eating a watermelon. Okay, on a hot day, if I'm hungry, I could sit down and eat an entire watermelon, but I don't take the entire watermelon and shove it in my mouth in one bite. Instead, I manage it by carving it up into little pieces and eating the little pieces one after another, and as a consequence I'm able to perform the task of eating the watermelon without choking. Here I'm writing a program that involves a lot of data verification, and rather than trying to do everything in one method, I carve it up into more manageable size methods. I do one task, and then I call up another specific task, and then you'll have to write a function that also gets called up here. So what's going on in this function? Okay, I'm giving it 4 chunks of data, which happen to be the contents of the text boxes on the form. Okay, and we can look at that button click event method and see the argument list here in a moment, but trust me for now that these parameter values are going to correspond with the text box data that the user inputs. I create a local variable called myDate, and I set it equal to an instance of the JavaScript date class. Now, in JavaScript there are many chunks of program code that are pre-written and packaged in what's called classes. And in order to avoid having to write all that program code yourself, if you just want to use some of that pre-written code, like the code that would be necessary to create an object that has the ability to interact with the system clock, instead of having to write all those hundreds of lines of code, then what you can do is simply create an instance of that code, copy that code into your program, and that instance is known as an object. So in this case, I'm creating a variable called myDate that's going to be used as my date object. And new date is actually creating a new instance of the date class. So I create this instance of the date class, this object called myDate, and thereafter I can use the functions that are built into that object. So myDate, for instance, has a getFullYear method, which is a program that will allow the date part, the year part of the date to be returned back to the program. All right, so I create an instance of the object, create this instance of the class, I create this object called myDate. I fire off an alert just to show that I have been there. You know, I'm tracing the execution of my program code. I create another variable called thisYear, and I assign it, at the time I declare it, I assign it the value that's returned from invoking the date object that I created up here, the date object's getFullYear method. So I have to call up the code that's going to return the year part of the date by referencing object.method, where myDate is the object and getFullYear is the method. And that's going to return, in this case, you know, until December 31st of this year, it's going to return a value of 2015, and it will store it in a variable called thisYear. So at that point, I create the variable and I populate it, at least currently, with the value 2015. That's stored in memory now. And then I just fired off an alert again to verify that, yes, indeed, I was able to read that component from the date. And now I know when that alert fires that, yes, my program has captured the 4-digit date and it is stored in my local variable called thisYear. Then I assign a value of 1 to good data. Now I think I could have assigned a value of true. Okay, this is my ignorance in JavaScript. I haven't worked with JavaScript much in recent years, so in order to get the program out the door, I decided I would use 1 and 0 because I knew that would work, but I'll probably go back and test this. You can try it yourself. I believe true and false, the words true and false written in lowercase, spelled out completely, TRUE and FALSE, written in lowercase, are values that can be stored in good data. You don't surround them with double quotes or anything. You just put in true, false. They're recognized as Boolean values. And the other way of doing this, in a way that I know will work, is the way I've done it here. Instead of using true, I use a value of 1. Instead of using false, I use a value of 0. So I take this global variable up here that's available to all of my functions, and in this verify data function, I assign it a value of 1, and you can think of that as innocent until proven guilty. Okay, so I am assuming the data is good by assigning it a value of 1, unless something goes wrong, and then I'm going to reset it back to a value of 0, to a value of not good, false, you know, good data. So I set it equal to 1, being optimistic, and then I check to see if text box 1, which is this parameter value right here, which came from this text box, the argument is this text box, right? I check to see if it is an empty string. That would mean the user didn't put anything in it. And if the user didn't put anything in there, the if will evaluate true, and I'll reset good data to 0. Same thing with the second parameter, which comes from the text box where my last name's stored. I check to see if it's empty. That means the user didn't provide that data, and if they didn't provide the data, then I flag it by setting good data back to 0 or false. And so I do that for the first 2 text boxes, okay? And that's the way I deal with the first name and the last name. There isn't a whole lot more I can do other than check and see if the user put something in there. Okay, so if they put in something really stupid, misspell the name or whatever, the program's not going to pick up on it. So there are limits as to how much I can validate some of the fields of data. Last name and first name, I make a feeble attempt to validate it by just checking to make sure that they put something in the text boxes. Then I make a call to this other method that I've written, this other function I've written called test phone. Okay, and when I call test phone, I pass it the parameter text box 3, which happens to be the contents of this thing right here. Okay, so I will be passing it my third parameter, and I've got an alert said made it, and I print out the parameter value so that when the program runs initially, I like to put these alert statements in at the very beginning of every function just so I can see that the function yes indeed did get called up, and I can verify yes indeed when the function got called up the parameter value that I anticipated was provided to the function. So that'll tell me that. Then I create a couple of local variables, phone 2 and phone 3. And then I initialize those variables to an empty string, double quote, and then I drop into a for loop, and oh my goodness, things are going to get very tricky now, okay? So I have commented out an alert statement that I had in there previously, and so that's something that I frequently do, is I'll put in an alert statement if everything seems to be working based upon what the outcome I see from the alert statement. Then maybe I think, well, I'm going to make some more changes. I better leave that alert statement in because I might want to use it again, but I can deactivate it by putting / by transforming it into a comment statement. And if you'll recall, comment statements are non-executable, so if I put // it renders that statement non-executable. All right, so that's what I did there. Then I begin to check things, okay? And I'm using that is not a number property, and I am checking the character position in the variable in the parameter phone at the very first character position. Now this is going to be difficult for me to explain, so bear with me here. If you consider this string of characters right here, that would be the character position at 0. That would be the character position at 1. That would be the character position at 2, and I changed something around there a little bit. I'm not sure I flipped those two values, but character position 0, character position 1, character position 2, 3, 4, 5, the hyphens at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so the char@ method uses an index into that string of characters. And if I have stored this value in a parameter called phone, and if I pass that parameter over to this method, then phone is going to be equivalent to whatever the user put into the text box. The value stored in phone is going to be equivalent to the value that the user put into the text box, and therefore in this for loop, which begins with I having been initialized to 0, the first time through, if I attempt to look at the character at the ith position, I has a value of 0, I'm looking at the very first character in the value that's stored in phone. And I check to see whether or not it's false that that position stores a non-numeric. Now this is hard to wrap your head around. I've got this property called isNan, and it requires that I, within parentheses, put in some kind of character that it can evaluate. And in this case, it's going to take the first character that it finds in the parameter that comes from that text box. And let's say, for instance, that first character value is 6, as it appears highlighted in the form. Then I would be checking to see if 6 is not a number equals false. And that would evaluate true. 6 is a number, and this is checking for not a number. So isNan, with whatever evaluates to 6 equal false is a true statement. That would, more or less read, is not a number 6, maybe we say it backwards, 6 is not a number equals false. Well, that's true. If I said x is not a number equal false, then that would be a false statement, because x is not a number. If I say 6 is not a number, that evaluates false, because 6 is a number. I'm sorry, I'm telling you, I'm getting a little screwed up here in my explanation. If I have something that evaluates to 6, and I check to see 6 is not a number, that would be false, so I would have false equal false. All right, now W3C schools, which you can Google for, have excellent documentation on the isNan function, and if what I explained does not make sense, then there is an alternative source that you can go to. Okay? So I go through here the first time and I check to see whether or not when I has a value of 0, whether the first character is not a number equal false. If that's true, it's going to concatenate that value into a string that's going to be stored in the variable phone2. Remember, phone2 was initialized to an empty string up here. So now, under these circumstances, phone2 would store a value of 6. And in the next iteration, it would evaluate, 7 is not a number, that's false, false equal false, the whole expression evaluates true, and it would concatenate the 7 and store 6, 7. And in the next iteration, when I is equal to 2, it would be looking at that third character, be looking at 5, and it would be checking to see 5 is not a number, that's false, false equal false, that's a true expression. So we'd go ahead and concatenate that as well, and the stored value in phone2 after the third iteration would be, in this case, 675. The next iteration, when I is equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, when it's equal to 3, then we would be looking at the 6, okay, same thing, it'll evaluate true, and I'm going to leave it to you to figure out the details of that, but basically I'm just copying off those characters from phone, okay, so I'm using phone's value, I'm taking individual characters, one character after another, and copying them off in the event that they are actually characters. And if they are, I copy them off if they are numeric characters. Okay, and if they are not numeric characters, I do not copy them off. So as a consequence, after going through this phone length number of times, after going through this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, okay, so I have less than, it's actually going to go through phone length minus 1 number of times because of that less than relational operator. But after going through this thing 10 times, it will have copied out all of the numeric numbers into phone 2. And then when I finish that loop, the next statement executes an alert statement, and it fires off a message that shows all the characters in that text box minus, it shows all the numeric characters and only the numeric characters. So in this case it would show all the characters minus the hyphen. And you may recall that that actually happened when we ran the program. I'll give you a copy of this program and you can run it and verify it on your own. Now, if the user provided the correct number of characters, then once it copies everything off, there ought to be a number of characters whose length value is 10. And so what I do is I check to see if phone 2, the variable that contains all those digits that have been copied off, if the length value is 10, then I do some stuff. Otherwise, I take the else path, and in this case, you'll need to modify this and write ERR, if it takes the else path, write ERR right back here to this, overwrite this value in the text box with the word ERR as in error. Okay, that's only if it takes the else path. If it does not take the else path, if it finds that it's copied off the correct number of digits, now it's ready to start inserting those hyphens. And it's going to iterate 3 times and concatenate, then stick a hyphen in, then it's going to iterate another 3 times and stick a hyphen in, and then it's going to iterate another 4 times. With each iteration, it's going to add, keep appending numbers from phone 2, individual characters from phone 2, and it's going to store them in phone 3. Okay, so again, you need to study the details of that. And then there would be one final alert fired off where I would see the value that got copied off, and this is where I see that third alert that shows me not the original input minus everything except the numeric values, but rather this third alert is going to show me the numeric values with the hyphens properly inserted. And that alert can go eventually. Okay, that was just in there for debugging purposes. Alright, so that all happened whenever test phone got called up, and then when test phone gets called up from function verify data, that's everything that I have written in the way of program code. So that's how my program code works. You can watch this video many times. You can study the code that I'm going to provide you, and you can go to the W3C school tutorials and learn more. But eventually you've got to understand all the nitty-gritty details of this because your assignment then is going to be to come back here and do something roughly equivalent here. Namely, you're going to be looking at the user's input, checking to make sure that the month range is appropriate, that the day range is appropriate, and then you're going to yank the date off the system clock, the year part of the date off the system clock, and you're going to insert it into those verified fields with the hyphens separating the three components. You have to write a method to do all the stuff I've described regarding the date of birth field, and you're also going to have to write another method that is going to clear out the form. The method that clears out the form gets called from a button. It's real straightforward. The method that checks the date of birth field to verify that data, that is going to get called from the method verify data, and it should probably get called right after this. So you can make a call to your method the same way that I made a call to my test phone method, and you'll need to create the method, create the call to that method then, and call it again from this verify data function. Okay, I think I am telling you everything I need to. You all have my telephone number, and you're perfectly capable of sending me a text or calling me if you have difficulty. And I'm not trying to make this any more difficult than need be, but we're at a point in the semester where we've learned enough about the language that we can begin to apply it to more complex problems, and as the complexity of the problems increases, then it requires more thought, more study time on your part, more effort, and it also may require that you ask me follow-up questions. Now, I have a video that I'm going to also add, a second video that I'll put up here and label properly. It's one that I did yesterday in response to a problem that one of the students in the class had. So the student said, hey, I can't get my project to work. Can you take a look at it? Well, I found several things, and I thought, really it would be helpful for you to see how I debug this program and for me to point out the mistakes and so forth. So I'll provide that video link as well, and you may want to watch it. Let me rephrase that. You should watch it a time or two, then you should watch this second video, the one that I'm currently recording, 2 or 3 times, and then you should go back and read these specifications several times over before you ever attempt to make any changes. And again, the code's getting more complex, so it's very, very possible to make dumb mistakes, misspell things. I tried to point some of that out in the video that I did yesterday, but don't wait until the last minute to do this program, because it may take a little while to get it working. So we're doing interesting things. You're learning, some pretty complex material, and no one said this course was necessarily going to be easy, but that may also be an indication as to why people with programming skills are very much in demand. And as you learn something complex and you put your time and energy into it, at some point there's likely to be a big payday. So understand that and keep that thought in mind. All right, I think it's everything I can tell you. Good luck with it.